Hey, it's Christian. Um, John Vervaeke. So he's the overt secularist in the Masters of Meaning universe. I always perked up when Jordan Peterson's engaging a person with a person's ideas in a fundamental way, not just like he's curious about politics um, or just out of curiosity, but he's pointing at something. He's kind of poking at something that has to do with the deeper aspects of meaning, and that's what his conversations with like Pageau and Vervaeke at least resonated with me that way. It really connects to kind of like his deepest interest, it seems. Something I like about Vervaeke is his calm persona. It is fun to see him get excited, but he's never unkind, and he's winsome in that way. I heard on a podcast, I think, that Paul VanderKlay shared that he was raised kind of in a very harsh, fundamentalist Christian upbringing, and it seems at least like that's part of the reason that that the Christian religion doesn't fit him. And I was watching some recent podcasts that he had done, and he's involved in like Tai Chi as a rhythm for meaning, along with his, scientific and philosophical endeavors and work. Something that I've kind of picked up listening to him. I've listened to him talk to Jordan B. Cooper and maybe Paul. I think it was Paul recently. And he kind of mentioned something. I'd heard another kind of public intellectual, a guy named John McWhorter, who kind of deals more with race politics and stuff. But they were talking. John McWhorter is an atheist, and he was talking about meaning and cultivating meaning in culture, and what are the ways, kind of maybe apart from standardized religion, that can be done. And they both, I think maybe John Vervaeke and McWhorter both mentioned like theater, and you can see how that kind of makes sense because of like there's a congregation, there's a liturgy, there's the kind of pre-service fellowship, and there's the drama, the climax of the show. There's commonality, there's sacredness to those theaters and to maybe dressing up. There's ceremony involved, so I can see that. I just, and I don't think he's saying, any of them are saying that that's a complete substitute for a religious kind of hole or vacuum, but I can see the parallel in things like that. And I think that looking in culture for those things when you're not a part of it in religion, like in a practicing religion, why those would become even more important to you. My wife has a story that when she was young, and she has there's 4 children in their family, and they enjoyed going to theater growing up, and they've brought me into that as part of their family. And now we take our kids some. But she said that she remembers being at a theater, and they were all very young. Probably they're all 2 or 3 years apart, and there's 4 of them, and she was probably 6 or something. And her younger siblings were causing kind of, disturbance during, it may have been cats. I don't even remember what the story, but she remembers people scoffing and those types of things because it's interrupting a sacred experience. So that's something I kind of got from Vervaeke's, like, what are ways in a God is dead kind of Nietzsche, post-Nietzsche world, and that we make meaning. So kind of perspective on that. And then of course, like looking at like theater that way is like a Pageauian, which obviously all these people are carrying these frames from people that they learned them from, like Peterson from Carl Jung and things like that. But for me, it's from Pageau, and it helps me have either empathy or understanding in a space where others might just call it idolatry, and fine, but that's just gonna make you unkind maybe to other people. So I ended up seeing recently that Tai Chi is one of the ways that Vervaeke has found a lot of meaning, and that reminds me of like MMA culture in a way, even though I think Tai Chi is much more meditative, contemplative, and there's some movements involved in it and stuff, but he's developed a few words, and one of them is dialogos. So like dialectics and logos, and the logos is that Platonic word that John uses in the beginning of his gospel. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was God, and the Logos was with God. And that, again, is this big connection going all the way back to the early Peterson content, how the Logos, like, what does it mean to be full Logos? Like that's kind of been memed a little bit. And, when I was studying that in college, the word, it kind of is translated directly as the word. And, and then that's mapped onto like the Bible, and it kind of lifts up like a biblicism. But Peterson's kind of pulled my mind out of that in a way that it has a lot more to do with full meaning, and that was in the beginning, and that is what we seek to know God, and God is the fullness of all of that, and then Peterson maps that onto Jesus, and I've seen him get very emotional about that. Someone that is truly one with God in that way, and one with wisdom, and so Vervaeke talks about, well, how in this kind of post-meaning culture in the West, and with the breakdown of things, which I kind of talked about the blurring of lines in my IDW movie, and even though that was like an exciting time, it also yields a certain amount of chaos, and that's another Pageau idea that I've kind of grabbed onto. But Vervaeke's talking about dialectics, so conversational knowledge, and how there's these other disciplines within philosophy, but he sees it's kind of been lost on like the love of wisdom. And wisdom isn't just knowledge, and it's something my father-in-law and I have a conversation about, is like, what are the meaning of words? He's always like, now, what do you mean by when you say that word? And what is the definition of that word? Or he'll have me recite a definition. But I think wisdom is one of those words, and it's, knowledge in application, maybe how to use knowledge well. And, in philosophy, you can get wrapped up in argumentation and proofs and those types of things. But that doesn't always play out in a practical sense, and you see Vervaeke desiring for that to be played out. And obviously, with his negative experience with religion, he has, in some ways, left that behind. He does mention that he still values the Bible in ways, and he's not derogatory towards all religion. I think he maybe would say that his experience was within a certain sect or, way. And so this Dialogos thing, as I've kind of now, over this, even just the last few days with Waves of Obsession video that he dropped a few days ago, which I hadn't even seen that when I kind of decided to come out of my own sort of lurkerdom. It was kind of interesting because someone shared that, or Grizz shared that on Twitter, and I'm like, oh, that's weird because I'm kind of doing the same thing at this very same time. And but what it is I think you have all these lovers of wisdom, seekers of wisdom, that have for 7 years just like input, and there's no output. And all of a sudden it just, maybe the waves of that obsession, it just comes out. And Vervaeke talks about that being the Socratic method. Well, nobody's town square is filled up with people wanting to have these conversations, but in this little corner is a type of town square, and and Waves of Obsession, he kind of illustrated it more as like a bazaar, but you're in that hall and you're kind of, or in that alleyway or whatever, and you can kind of interact. And I was watching someone who commented on my video, one of my videos earlier, that he did his introduction a day or two ago, and he was talking about C.S. Lewis having these rooms versus hallways, and like it's good to be in your rooms, but it's not good to live in the hallways. But it feels like when you enter in this space, you're kind of entering in the hallway, and it's hard to find rooms in real life where you can engage with this desire for wisdom. And I think even 12 Rules for Life, you have a psychologist talking about wisdom. Bend down and pet a cat. What does that mean? It sounds like a Chinese proverb, and that is, but what is the wisdom behind that? And then he'll go into a chapter about stopping and seeing the world and caring for things and not being a sociopath. So, and I think the thing about this little corner is that it's safe to not be too orthodox, though there is a lot of orthodoxy, and it's hard to find that outside of here. And so I'm excited. I think I'm trying to get scheduled for my very first podcast with Nameless Fridays, and we're working towards doing that, maybe releasing in a few weeks. And so that's like kind of the next level of this engagement in this Vervaeke Dialogos, dialectic wisdom exchange and questioning and answering and in ways not possible, in the same way that it was never possible for a professor like Jordan Peterson to, he could have written books, but his, Maps Meeting didn't get on the New York Times bestseller, but YouTube catapulted him because of this technology. That I saw another really great comment on a video that I did that was about how we sat and we listened to people just, lord over us with what to think, and then that all broke down, and then it became memes, and now it's trying to turn into conversation even on the broad edges. I mean, I am in a small town in a small state, and not in a city, and that's what I think part of this little corner is, a democratizing of cities and towns for town square information. And so I kind of want to hit on Vervaeke's experience with fundamentalism, because I have my own. I mentioned that I'd kind of had some charismatic and then kind of Baptist background in my early childhood and then in my youth. And um, he, John Vervaeke, I've heard in several podcasts, he credits his deep anxiety and stress about the rapture and an experience where he thought that he had been left behind to make light of it. And I feel that deeply because I had my own kind of types of experiences like that, and I love my family and my dad, and but there were times growing up where that was the deepest elements of meaning being put forth in my home growing up, and my dad really believed it, and so I don't blame him for that, and it's a part of Christianity that I think has been difficult for people. So I hear you, man. And I've had these conversations with my dad, now that I still view things as the world can be getting chaotic and weird technologies and stuff, but that's not the core of my faith, and that's not what I'm just looking for around every corner. And if you want to get technical, like I'm just gonna be a millennial. So, but yeah, that was like deconstruction, in a way, and I just I had a great opportunity because my journey out of being Baptist into like more of a Presbyterian, and I don't even know now, but still closer to that, was when I was working at a church, and we hired a new pastor who was ordained Presbyterian, and he was an interesting guy because I'll just go ahead and say I'm in Arkansas, in a small town, and he was from L.A. and he'd gone to UCLA and got a history degree, and then he went to Yale and got his Master's of Divinity. Yet he kind of had come out, and he wasn't like he didn't become. I guess you could. I don't want to use the political terms. He didn't come out extremely liberal. I'll just say that. And he was so easy to talk to and be around. And he used to say he wanted our staff to be like Silicon Valley, and ideas to come and flow. So that was a lot of fun. And then we hired another guy who's super passionate about like theology, and then he started having existential, deconstructive, meaning crisis. Maybe I should be Catholic. And then this was all happening like almost 10 years ago. So like, so in those, it was a safe place with my pastor at the time. And I miss him, and we're still good friends. And, that allowed me to kind of walk through and walk out of certain maybe doctrines and theologies in a way that was really helpful. And I also credit like my father-in-law, who I've talked about, them being Lutheran, and that being helpful as well. So let's see. So the last kind of, I guess, angle on all of this is with Vervaeke and structures to build meaning. I still think that the Christian church is a powerful avenue for that. And I know a lot of people in this little corner that are I say I know, I kind of assume, but I kind of get the impression, that there's just a lot of seeking in that way, away from, what I would call like mass appeal evangelicalism um, to more, traditional historical churches as a way to do that. I haven't quite gone there completely myself, but I think there are things within these structures, that when we have like I say we, I've barely scratched the surface of this little corner, but the estuaries, and I think there probably are meetups, and like obviously the Jordan Peterson gatherings that he's had, and I think Jonathan Pageau has done some symbolic meaning stuff and these conferencing type things, but in our local spaces, and I mean, I've said already that I don't find a lot of that here, but that doesn't mean that for everyone where they're at in their journey that religion doesn't provide that framework. I think that there is hope and good opportunity for wisdom and meaning making to be built in structures within parts of Christianity. And obviously that's part of this group, but Pageau and whatnot, and even Peterson. And I'm not even comfortable saying that even in evangelicalism that there's not wisdom that is being passed down, but I think that there are a lot of flaws. There's too much unhelpful jargon and too much pretense to keep people from reaching a level of vulnerability that allows them to feel like it's okay to make mistakes. And that is a and not only make mistakes, but to fail, to have failure. And because that's where wisdom, wisdom is made in two ways, either by learning from other people's mistakes or your own. And unfortunately, if you're a person that has to learn from your own mistakes, sometimes religious structures, though they may talk about grace, aren't very gracious, and even don't have don't have good answers for certain problems that vex people, and then in the other parts, especially the parts that Vervaeke experienced within his sect, are that they're focusing on fear. That make it very hard to find wisdom, and maybe not fear, maybe focus on being scary and being scared. There's healthy fear. And I do believe that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. The fear of porcupines is the beginning of all wisdom. And that's where that's what it means to be able to learn from other people's mistakes or other people's wisdom, instead of having to get wisdom through your own failures. Which that's better than continuing to fail, but still difficult. So, and I think this little corner, there's not a lot of pretense, and I think that's helpful.